Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 19th Policy Committee meeting. Excuse us. It's not my phone, it's somebody's phone. All right, well, I guess we'll have to wait that out. Anyway, welcome everybody. Welcome Rachel. Welcome Mrs. McMenamin, Julia, Chuck, and Lydia are here. They'll be along momentarily. As will Mr. Batchelor. Hello, Dr. Stevenson, and hello, Mr. Diazio. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stevenson to give us some administrative remarks, if he has any.
I don't have any administrative remarks. We will just go according to the agenda outline. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So this is time for public comment. Does anybody have any public comment this evening? Good evening, Mrs. Spurtle.
Good evening.
And here comes Mr. Madden.
You guys upstairs.
That was Lydia's cell phone.
We're too fast to get your coffee.
That's right.
Okay, yes, you're on now.
Now I'm on. Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. Good evening. Just a couple questions. And that is, there was a point brought up in questions last month. Review of the homework policy has not been brought up yet, but the question was whether that would be addressed as part of the sleep study. Are they reviewing the homework policy? Because it appears to play an integral part in how long students have to stay awake when they're home. And then I had, in reviewing the policies, what jumped out at me, there's probably an explanation, but on the foreign exchange student policy. And that was that the board, there's a statement in there under authority. The board limits the number of foreign exchange students admitted to the District 2, and then there's a blank spot, and the number 1 is in there. Student per school year unless otherwise approved by the board. Question is why only 1? It seems to me that would be something that the school district would welcome, is the experiences of a foreign student, exchange student, and being able to send some Radnor students who wish to go abroad to study. And whether or not you had in redoing this policy, and I noticed that the number 1 is a change to the policy, whether or not you reviewed any of school districts in the area to see what their policies are and how they handle this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And you know what? Thank you for that segue, because the first item on our agenda, well, actually, we can do the approval of minutes, and then we will segue into policy 239. So anybody have any issues with the minutes? No? I would just like to request with the minutes, it's a small thing, but our student representative name is spelled incorrectly. Oh, okay. So in fact, I'm looking at her placard, and it's the same mistake. So it's understandable that it's R-A-C-H-E-L. There's no A, and she was okay with my mentioning that this evening. So just for the future, especially since she plays a big role in calling snow days and such, we should get her name spelled properly. So with that,
all complaints to her.
right. So with that, Lydia, we are in the process of approving the minutes. Any questions, concerns, comments? Okay, terrific. So consider the minutes approved, and let's move on to agenda item number 1, which is 239, foreign exchange students. Dr. Stevenson, can you walk us through this policy, which we'd like to go for a first read?
Yes, thank you. So this policy is being brought back this month after discussion last month. During the last month's discussion, the question was about the number of students who would be considered eligible for this under this policy. When we first originally had the conversation, the number that was recommended, or that average number of districts in the area used, was 3 that our solicitor shared. Because we didn't have enough time to consult with the superintendent before and on the recommendation of a member of the committee, we tabled this until we had an opportunity to consult with the superintendent. In addition to the consulting with the superintendent, it's recommended by Mr. Batchelor to talk to Mr. Bechtel, who is the principal at the high school. In talking to Mr. Bechtel, over the last 5 years, they've only had one student at a max that has been eligible, and that was this year. There was a student this year who fell under this category who was allowed. The district's position was that we would stick with one for a couple of reasons. One is that this is in line with the recommendation from the high school principal. The second is that we do not have, while in the policy it says foreign exchange students, we do not have in a program where we invite students here or we in exchange for sending students there. Question came up last month, which was clarified about students that come from England on a bi-yearly basis, and what they do, it is a visit. It is not an exchange program, so that because that was one that was under the assumption that it fell under that. So therefore, it is the recommendation to be consistent with the recommendation of the high school principal, Mr. Bechtel, that we leave that the number for one, with the understanding that the policy allows that if there is a change that we would have, that the board has the right to make those changes, but it would have to be a board change.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation, and I'd like to hear from the committee if anybody has any questions, concerns about this policy. Otherwise, we'd like to move it along for a first read next week. I'll start with our student. Rachel, do you have any questions or concerns about the policy?
I do have one question. So, when foreign exchange students come, do they, for the period of time that they're here, are they automatically admitted into EL programs, or is that part of the assessment that they take, and we establish that?
They would have to be a part of the assessment program to establish that.
Okay, even for that window that they're here? Like,
Yes,
what is like the range of time that they would come for?
It depends. I mean, under this, and under this student, one student, it was for the year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Mrs. McMenamin? Julia?
I just want to say thank you. You addressed all my concerns, and just to reiterate, I recall that our reasons for going to one student was for at least for me, and I think we all agreed, but there were concerns about not having enough resources if we were overcrowded that year as a school and we're taking in extra students. I believe this was driven because there's new law that has to assess the English abilities, English speaking abilities. So I was concerned at least about if our English learners program was under-resourced, and here we are adding more people. And I appreciate that there's flexibility in case it's a good year and it makes sense to take on more than one student. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lydia, do you have any questions or comments, concerns?
You know what, I'm going to defer all that because my apologies, I didn't hear your whole introduction, so I won't. I'll go back and listen to that first. Thanks.
Okay, and Mr. Madden?
I guess the only question I have, do we send exchange students anywhere?
We do not.
We do not. So are these actually exchange students? We're not, there's no process here for exchanging students. Just, I mean, just not trying to be a wise guy.
Well,
but,
I mean, it's the verbiage that is issued by the law. But you're right. I understand your point.
I think as we move forward, I think it's a great idea to have exchange students, so maybe we should look back into what we've done previously. I remember when I was around there, we had exchange students from France, from Germany. We had a lot of exchange students. Yeah, so maybe that's something that we need to look into as we move forward. But yeah, thank you very much for this document.
Okay, Lydia, I wasn't sure, did you want us to come back to you, or?
Oh, no, not at this point.
Okay, all right, then I guess it's the agreement of this committee to move 239 to the full board next week for a first read. And thank you, everybody, for your feedback and questions, and folks, our administrative lead and solicitor for putting this together for us. Next item on the agenda is our smoking and electronic smoking products policies. We have 222, 323, 423, and 523. Dr. Stevenson, do you want to walk us through those? They have been through a first read already.
Yes, this policy has been through the first read, and we are asking that it's approved for the second read. I do want to say that while this is recommended for a second read, you know, particularly the electronic smoking product portion, as you know, this is a constant issue that schools are grappling with, and the conversation about it is continuously. And in fact, currently there is legislation in the Pennsylvania legislature about making some additional changes about the law. So while we are moving forward with this, because this is the most up-to-date piece, I want to just say to the committee and to the board that do not be surprised if this comes back again. And the reason why it would come back again, and this time next year maybe, or in 2 years, is because of the constant changes in the conversations about this. Thank you.
Great, thank you for pointing that out. That's absolutely true. So I'd like to turn this over again for committee feedback. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on these 4 policies?
No, not right now.
Mrs. McMenamin? Julia?
No, I think the revision captured all of our discussions very nicely. Thank you.
And Lydia? Okay, and Mr. Madden?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, and I just as a little preview for next month, there are 2 other policies that where the prohibition against smoking and electronic smoking products come into play. Those are 707 and 904. And Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Diazio have those on tap for next month, so that the language in these policies is also applied to those policies. 904 is public attendance at public events. So there's no vaping, there's no electronic smoking products and tobacco use allowed there, so that has to be modified, et cetera. So just so you know that this is not quite finished yet, we'll see more of this next month. But in the meantime, I think these are ready to go on for next week, second read and adoption. Dr. Stevenson?
Yes.
Sound good?
Recommendation is to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. And then we are on to agenda item number 3, which is 247, our anti-hazing policy. I'd like to turn that over to Dr. Stevenson to give us some further explanation on that too.
I would love to, but I would like to give all the, I'd give our solicitor time to speak, so therefore I'm going to yield my time to the solicitor to make some additional comments about the anti-hazing policy.
Thank you. The majority of the revisions to this policy stem from the new law, the Timothy Piazza hazing law that went into effect earlier this year. We also, I believe, created an administrative regulation to go along with the policy. There's been some definitions that have been added, and those definitions come from the new law. There's also language that's been added in, similar to many of our other policies, where victims or individuals who witness misconduct, when there's a reporting procedure in there, we added language about there being no retaliation for good faith reports and provisions regarding the confidentiality of those reports. So those are the bulk of the changes to this policy and AR, and when it's approved, it will comply with the current state law.
Terrific, thank you very much. So do we have any feedback from our committee, starting again over there with Rachel?
I have one thought. So I've just glanced over it, so I might be wrong, but is there anywhere we address the way that this can extend to social media? I just feel like that's a really pertinent thing in this day and age that might be worth addressing. Or realistically, I mean, those things don't just happen on the field at school. Like they come home. You know, it's hard to avoid. So that's my suggestion, that we might want to consider it if it hasn't already been considered.
I will turn that over, I guess, to Dr. Stevenson and our solicitor. I mean, and that might tread a little bit into our anti-bullying policy that covers that, because the definitions that go along with hazing really have, they're very specific to things that tend to be physical, I think.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure that electronically you can haze somebody, but I'll turn it over to the solicitor.
I think that's the critical point here. Most of the time, the conduct that takes place online would fall either under the bullying policy or possibly the unlawful harassment policy. Generally, with hazing, there's physical contact that's involved.
Okay.
You know, it's things like forcing someone to eat something or making someone be subjected to beating or something like that. That's usually what you see in hazing. If there were things that took place on social media, to the extent that they did fall within the definition of hazing, they could be treated as hazing, but most commonly, they would be either harassment or bullying.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Good question, thank you.
Yeah, very good question.
Mrs. McMenamin, do you have any questions?
No, I was actually kind of teetering on the same kind of thing, so.
Okay. Julia?
One minor question. I'm looking under the third paragraph that begins with hazing. And that second line, it says, for the purpose of initiating, admitting, or affiliating a minor or student. And I was just curious that it even talked about a minor as opposed to just students. Is there a situation where we would need to cover a minor who isn't a student?
I think that student is probably sufficient in this case. I can't think of a case where that would be an issue. So I think I agree. There might be an extra word there. We could probably take minor out.
Not that it'll make a big difference if you don't, but.
And that's considered non-substantive, that we could?
Yep.
Okay, terrific.
Why is it there? Like, where did that come from? That's odd phrase, minor or student.
I wonder if it used to say a minor student. Could that be the issue?
Well, some students are not minors.
Yeah, but why minor or a student?
No,
It's
I'm just
weird.
saying. Some are not.
Did it come from the law?
No, I can't say one way or the other because I don't know that detailed, whether that's the language, but student is sufficient because
Yeah.
it would cover the minors that the district is responsible for.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question's the easiest question. So, Mr. Diazio, can you just repeat the name of the law that changed?
Or it's the Timothy Piazza hazing law. And that was new state law.
Thank you.
And Mr. Madden?
Just to piggyback on that, we had said that someplace we're going to document why we changing things, and that will be put someplace, correct?
I think that will that be part of your board report?
I'm sorry, could you, I missed the question.
Well, what we're trying to do is have a documented trail of why we are changing policies or updating the policies, and this policy is being updated specifically because of a law change, and I just wanted to know how we're going to.
That's in the agenda. It's described there in the agenda, under this agenda, under this agenda item.
At the board meeting,
Yes, because it's
as it
on,
moves forward, but,
Are
okay.
you talking more about like to the community and to the student body?
Well, when I'm looking into the policies, and I see a policy and it says, for instance, last revised, I think it would be great to have last revised and then why it was revised because of a change in the law, myself, personally.
do you mean in 2017, why was it revised, or why are we revising it today?
We're revising it today because of the law that changed. And all I'm saying is, if I was looking at a policy and I see that it's been revised, say, for instance, it was revised in 2017, I don't know why.
And here's the thing that's nice now with board docs. So you could easily, if we've listed the year it's changed,
Right.
it's then a simple search to look up that year to see what was then conducted on the agenda. So you could see it that way. besides
Right.
making a note within the document itself. I think that's what you're trying to.
Right, because on the agenda today, it says, which someone might refer to, it says, "This policy is being revised in accordance with the October 2018 passage of Act 80, the Timothy J. Piazza anti-hazing law that requires that school districts adopt an updated written policy against hazing that includes the expanded provisions of this new law." Is that helpful or no?
Well, that's helpful, but that's in an agenda that if I'm looking at a policy, unless I can then go in and look at an agenda, I'm not really going to know why the policy was changed. If I'm looking at a policy, I think it would be just beneficial, even if you have that little one or whatever you have where you can click on it and then it'll take us to the board docs, I would be fine with that. I would prefer that it says it was changed due to the law, but that's just
Well,
me.
maybe, we can try to work through that mechanism.
Because that way you know why.
Okay, so we'll talk about that more a little bit after.
Yeah, the only reason is because there have been school districts that have just changed, and they were caught up on that, and they said they just changed their policy because their neighbor did, okay? And that, when they were brought to court over that, they lost, because that's not a good enough reason. So we have the reasons why we're doing things. I just think it would be a good idea to have it listed there.
So
We just don't change things because we feel like changing them. There are reasons why. So I just would like to see us, if there's agreement.
I think what would be better is Board Docs has been a great asset, and like Mr. Batchelor said, it is referenced there. What we don't want to do is to overstep the whole procedure about what we put in the policy part itself, but we could have a discussion about how to make reference to those things that are particularly outlined in those
Right.
things.
Okay.
So
Yeah, maybe there's a description in the policy section of board docs that says, like, if you are
Right,
looking for rationale,
exactly.
please
You read-
reference our agendas or
When
something
you're-
like that.
When you're using our policy
Would that,
documents.
Work better?
These are the procedures that you can go through. Yeah, a little thing like that. If you want to know why, you can click on this or that. Yeah, that would be good. An
Okay.
instructional guide to using it and how to find information in there.
Sort of at the home page
Yes.
of the manual.
That's all.
okay.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Thank you. Very good.
All right, super. As everybody knows, the ARs are not subject to board approval, but we've put the AR in there so that if you can look and see what the meat of the policy is all about. Does anybody have any questions after having reviewed the AR that they want to put forth? No? You, Andrea? Okay.
It says reporting the students who believe they or others have been subjected, that's reported to the principal, assistant principal, athletic director. There's a lot of people who would not be comfortable doing that.
Could you just, you're under the reporting
Under the
procedure?
reporting procedure.
First
So,
paragraph?
Right, if you have a student who's not comfortable with that, who might tell a friend or tell a teacher, it just seems like, it makes it seem to me that those are the 4 people that somebody has to get to, but they may tell somebody else first. So you may have somebody that doesn't even know who the athletic director is.
Right.
How do they know to get to that person? So I think they need to be encouraged to tell somebody, but then it has to get to one of these 4 people.
You know what? You just made me think of something. I'm so glad you brought that up. Is this appropriate to reference the Safe to Say, the new state, hotline where you can call anonymously and make a report? That way, if you're ratting out, people in your school, that's a lot more comfortable way to do it than to seek out, and then everybody knows you're looking for the athletic director or whatever. Should we put that in here?
Well, I'll leave that to the advice of our administrative liaison.
So, Ms. McMenamin, so I appreciate what you're saying, and I think it's something we can look at. But I would say that the second sentence, the complaints section, which says that complaints hazing by a student against another student shall be handled in the same manner as other student disciplinary investigations. So in cases like that, is that a student may not come to the principal or administrator. They may come to a teacher or a member of the staff. And as a member of the school community, that procedure, that following that discipline procedure is that they would notify the appropriate person. So the student could go to someone who is safe, and then when going to someone safe, that person would know that procedure to that. I think what you have opened up the conversation on, though, in addition to your question about that, is that when this is finally approved, that we would have to make sure that our administrators in the building review this with all members of the staff, so they are aware that if something comes up, the same way I know that we did when we first passed the anti-hazing that required coaches, particularly because this was related to a lot of this came out of activities in sports, that they were required to review it and discuss it with their students about what to do. I think you make a good point that that should be just a part of the norm of discussion as a school, so when it comes up that everyone is familiar with that.
That's great.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Julia, do you have any comments on the AR?
I do not.
Lydia?
No, you heard mine. Yeah. I just think there should be a mechanism for you to make an anonymous report. I think
I do believe.
that covers, I think, your issue.
Ed, do you mind pulling the microphone?
I do believe that there will be more guidance coming from the state on possible policy language regarding safe to say. Because it could have an impact on the hazing policy, it could have an impact on bullying, it could have an impact on the harassment policy, on many, many policies.
Because it's
Sexual
actually,
abuse.
I think, a perfect application for it, because that's the safe way for you to do that and not get in trouble as a member of a
Correct.
sports team or whatever.
Correct.
So.
And it's one of the items that the state has identified as a potential basis for a report through Safe to Say. I agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
You know, we have been educating our students, both at the middle school and high school, about safe to say, and I think we just also have to be mindful of when we're creating an AR, we want reporting procedures on where kids could go, knowing that they could still go to safe to say for things that are beyond hazing as well. I mean, safe to say is something that touches well beyond just hazing. The athletes, though, also have, and I'm make sure I have this accurate, they also have twice a year our athletes do anonymous surveys about their program, I think, twice during a season. Don't they do, I think it's at least once or twice during the season, they actually do anonymous surveys about the program they're in, you know, their athletic program, and those are strictly anonymous, and then that feedback is given directly to the high school administration and then the coaches as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on Andrea's, I actually would like to see or discuss the fact if we could put in teacher, coach. I don't see a coach in here. Not the first paragraph, reporting procedures. Principal, assistant, I understand it's a little wordy putting all these people in, but the chances, if I'm a student and I was hazed, I doubt very much if I would go see the principal, the assistant principal, the athletic director. I might see my counselor. Chances are I would go see either a coach or a teacher if I'm looking this from a student perspective. Those would be the people I would talk to, or I would talk to another student. And I'm not saying to put another student in there, but that's who I would talk to, or staff. It could be one of the staff people, because we have fantastic staff here that do know our kids. So, and I guess my next question would be, who sees the AR?
Those documents are public.
Well, I mean, as far as this procedure that we're going to have put in place for the kids, so that they'll know this will be put into the student handbook, or how will in other words, if I'm a student, how am I going to know who to contact without going into?
It will be a recommendation that when this is approved, one of the things that we do is when we make sure we do is share with all important stakeholders that have to deal with this. And one of the recommendations that we would make that this is reviewed by all principals that are responsible and those responsible for the handbook to make sure that it corresponds with this policy.
Okay, and that the students are notified
Yes.
somehow.
One of the things also, Mr. Madden, that's going to be forthcoming, we have the student discipline policy slotted this school year to review, and part of that process will be making sure all of the policies that somehow relate to discipline are incorporated, and that's probably a natural point, once that policy is revised, to then incorporate the revised policy into those handbooks.
Okay.
It can
so-
all be done at once,
Right,
and I
now-
think that's coming within the next couple months.
Now, what would the discussion surrounding teacher and coach being added to that?
I did work up some possible proposed language, if you want me to
Yes, that'd be
suggest
great.
it.
Yeah.
The sentence could read, "Students who believe they or others have been subjected to hazing are encouraged to promptly report such incidents to their principal, assistant principal, athletic director, school counselor, or another trusted school official." And then that second paragraph already obligates district employees to be alert to incidents of hazing and report to the building principal anyway. So if a student reports to their science teacher hazing, that science teacher is already under an obligation under this procedure to report that to the building principal, and then the building principal takes it from there. So I'm not concerned about adding "or another trusted school official" if that makes the group more comfortable with the procedure.
I just see not having the coach in there as something
Yeah.
that,
It could say "coach or another trusted school official" as well.
okay, all right,
Yeah, I would like to second the idea for a coach. I just, having recently been a part of one of those teams, it's just, coaches like to create this environment where they're approachable and they're your coach and they're judging the way you play more or less, but they create an environment where they're approachable and you can come to them with your problems and you spend hours with them during the season. So I think it was really important to include them in this.
I would also add the activity sponsor, just for consistency. We want to make sure people understand that this hazing policy applies not just to sports, all activities, even though it might be less common that a hazing incident would occur in a non-athletic context. The policy does read throughout coaches and activity sponsors in the event that it happened in something that was outside of athletics. Lydia, did you
Yeah,
have
but they
something?
would be covered by trusted school personnel.
Right, but that would be for consistency, and then everybody else would be like teacher, nurse, I see as other trusted school
Yeah,
person.
but it so makes sense to put coach in there. I
Right,
mean,
so
that's
no,
just like-
everybody's
Yeah.
in agreement on that. Anybody else have feedback on the AR at this point? No? I just wanted to, Mr. Diazio, in policy notification, there was a little, I was a little confused because I think that in the second paragraph, we talk about that the means of notification may include the website, and in the paragraph underneath that, it says that the policy will be posted on the website. So I was just wondering if perhaps we could decide whether it's a may or a shall for the website, and go from there.
So I think the policy "shall be posted" on the website is appropriate because this is one of the policies that under the school code, if the district has this policy, it needs to be posted online. All of the other items such as distribution in handbooks, school assemblies, those types of things, those are not required. What's required is that you notify the appropriate people of the policy. The means of notification are, other than having it posted on the website, are left up to the district to decide how it determines is the best way to do that. So I suppose you could say the means of notification, in addition to posting the policy on the website, may include but are not limited to. That might be one way to get around that.
Okay,
If
well,
that make-
however
if that
you want to
makes
do
sense.
it is fine. I just thought that that should be clarified, because it says may in one case and shall in another. So whichever is the right way to go.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind clarifying that, that would be great. Okay, so I guess that wraps up 247. We will send 247 for a first read next week, and we'll go from there. Before we wrap up or get to our last public comment, I just wanted, one of the previous public comments had to do with reviewing the homework review, policy review, and its relation to the sleep study, which I know had been mentioned previously, that there are several reasons why that homework policy review is underway. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Dr. Stevenson? Your favorite subject?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Golden. So we have been having a lot of conversations as an administrative team, talking about how to best put together this subcommittee that we talked about in the previous month, about to make sure this subcommittee is one that is doing the work based on the great work that's been done with the wellness study, doing the work that around the technology, and about the sleep study. In order to do that, we want to make sure that we allow those committees to fulfill their obligations. Like, for instance, the wellness committee is doing a homework survey for secondary students and elementary. We're making a decision whether it's parents or students. Technology is finishing up, as you heard about the work that they're doing. And the sleep study work is the presentation is coming up soon, and those decisions will be made. It was decided that it is in the best interest that rather than, because we were going to start the subcommittee work at the end of this month, to wait till those results come out, and then we can, based on what the survey is, decisions making about technology and the sleep study, based on that, then we can make some informative decisions or in discussion, more like the appropriate words, discussions around that. And it also gives us enough time, more time to invite a very diverse and robust group of people who can be a part of that survey, that conversation. So the hope is that that conversation will happen towards the end of April or May, depending on the fulfillment of conversations with those other committees.
I think I totally missed something. This is a conversation about opening up the homework policy again?
It's not about opening up the policy. It's about looking at so out of all those committees, out of wellness, there have been some conversations around homework and about how does that impact the overall wellness of students. For technology, they're looking at it in relationship to, we're looking at screen time. That's just an example. And with the sleep study, looking at people, these are conversations that have come up about whether, how does homework impact sleep? All of those things, taking that information and having the subcommittee, not a committee, but a subcommittee, to come and have conversations about those areas. What may come out of it is saying, a policy is good, and we can move forward. Out of it may come that we want that the committee may make recommendations to this committee about possible discussions and changes. So I can't make. There is no proposed outcome or agenda.
Okay. It just seems to me it's out of the purview of the policy committee to be looking at the homework policy, but looking at homework per se. Doesn't that fall under a holistic curriculum discussion?
Well, we did discuss this last month, and you had asked how long ago it was that we reviewed the homework policy.
Policy.
Right.
Okay,
So what this is doing, it's starting in policy only because it's a policy. And, I mean, Mr. Batchelor, perhaps you want to pick that up.
Sure. I think, Dr. Stevens and Anthony really summed it up well. We have a lot of things that are falling under this wellness umbrella, and I think the board and as a district, it was insightful that we set a goal this year to look at this overall wellness topic as a large umbrella, but our goal this year was to gather the data. And we realized there was a lot of components to this wellness piece. And one of the components under wellness, as well as looking at disciplines and the mental health and the referrals of our students and looking at PAYS data and other pieces that we'll be sharing in the spring on just where we are with what we've gathered with the data. One of the pieces was homework. Homework came up there through the wellness. What is been the impact of homework, and how is homework playing a role in the overall wellness of our students? Through the sleep committee, homework has come up often. Through this discussion of our students and how is sleep being tied to their mental health, how is sleep tied to how our kids' overall health. Homework has been a piece of that, and a discussion about what impact and role has homework played in that, as well as in our technology committee, we've had a lot of discussions. So yes, I think we are headed down a road where we passed a policy 2 years ago for homework, and we created an AR. It was maybe 4, sorry. All right, I'm still I'm on a 2-year window. It's
like
just
it
2
was
years
last
I've been here.
year. It seems
It
like
was
it was last
pre before. There was a policy that was in the works for a while. There's an AR, I think, that finally got completed, which would be 2 years this September. And we are at a time, based on what's happening with wellness and what's happening with sleep, where it's time to look again at this policy and look at this AR and say what we created 4 years ago. Do we still feel good about what we created? Is it doing what we thought? What has been the impact? Wellness is going down that road right now by just doing the survey to gather parts of the data. Once wellness has gathered some pieces of the data, I think we as a group then need to look and say, okay, we have additional data. How do we want to proceed on this component of homework? And what we're looking at doing is starting that conversation in the late spring, May, June, April, May, June, after we have more data in. But I think it is, one of the recommendations, no matter what we do with the sleep, is that we as a district need to take another look at homework and look at that policy and look at that AR. And really, it's good practice. If it's 4 years old, let's make sure it's doing what we anticipated it to be doing when we created it 4 years ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, and we should do all that. It just seems a little bit out of whack that it seems out of place that it should be in policy and not under, the administrative group that does the whole curriculum piece, that's all.
Well, and I think, and I think that's part of the discussion to come, exactly where do we want to hold it, but it's one that crosses both, because it is clearly curricular in nature, but there's a policy that governs it as well.
And there's a curriculum administrator who's working on it, because actually Dr. McKnight is the one who is developing the homework survey and administering it, and he's in the curriculum department, and that homework falls right within his purview of the wellness study, right?
It does, but we also knew Dr. Stevenson had a love for this topic,
Right.
too, so that was part of.
It's a team effort.
That's part of it.
How it happened.
No.
So did Dr. Robarczyk in the back.
Yeah.
Everybody's been part of this homework situation.
Yeah. And
It's such a popular subject.
it's important for us as a district to start to see how all these different components, especially this umbrella of wellness, how this is all coming together. And I think this is one of those pieces that we're going to have to, continue. We're going to be looking at.
Well, I still think, I don't know if I'm on, if it's coming through policy, then it should be a joint committee of curriculum. I mean, because it's clearly, last time we did the homework study, it was under curriculum, so that's where.
Well, yeah, policy's not going to do the homework study. I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's not, that's not what we're doing. We're looking at the policy. And one thing I would like to do is, but what's the purpose of homework? Okay, that's what I want to find out before we spend an enormous amount of time looking at it. What's the purpose of it? And if that's what.
That is a curriculum question.
Yeah, no. I agree. But what I'm saying is, before we look into how much we're giving and who's giving what and how many hours and all this, what's the purpose of it? And we can use cross-training for that. For instance, we're talking about writing in curriculum. And if I'm the science teacher, I can have a conversation with the English teacher, or language arts rather, and say, hey, my guys can do an essay. You can grade it. And that counts for writing and it counts for science. Boom. So I think we need to look at what homework, what's the purpose of homework, and are we actually providing what we wanted? Did we get what we wanted when we did this policy? That was just one of your remarks that you had just said. Let's see, where are we? 4 years out, we have an AR. Did it do anything? Did it do what we wanted? I don't even know what we wanted it to do, to be honest with you, at the time. I think now I'd like to see us be a little more forward-thinking and say, what do we want to do? And then we can measure whether we're there or not.
So before we move forward with that, we're going to wait for the wellness to just complete their piece.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about exactly how we want to move forward and, and what that looks like and who would be involved.
All right, that is a robust and engaging subject, so more of that to come. In the meantime, is there any new business from anybody on the committee? No? Okay, then we have a final public comment opportunity. If there's any, please come forward.
You do.
Homework AR. Cindy Spurtle, just one quick question back on the foreign exchange students. If I understood correctly when we were discussing that, there is no program for foreign exchange students, yet the AR is written to are participating in the approved exchange program of the district. So just a question, is we've written an AR for a program that doesn't exist, if I listened and understood that
No,
correctly?
We may have a program, it's just not have any students in it.
Well, I thought I had understood that there, in listening to the conversation, there wasn't a program. That's all.
We're going to
So
look
we'll
into it.
clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the policy meeting for tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.